The silence in courtroom 4B wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. Lydia Hart stood gripping the mahogany railing until her knuckles turned white, staring at the man she once promised to love forever. Across the aisle, her husband, Preston, didn't even look at her. He checked his Rolex, bored as if deleting a marriage was just another business transaction. His lawyer had already destroyed Lydia's reputation, drained her bank account, and was minutes away from taking her children. The judge raised his gavel to finalize the verdict that would ruin her life. But then the heavy oak doors at the back of the room groaned open. One person walked in, one sentence was spoken, and suddenly the multi-million-dollar smile on Preston Hart's face vanished. This is the story of how one question didn't just save a woman, it burned an empire to the ground. The fluorescent lights of the King County Superior Court hummed with a low buzzing frequency that seemed to drill directly into Lydia Hart's skull. It was 9:15 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, and outside the Seattle rain was hammering against the reinforced glass windows, blurring the city into streaks of grey and charcoal. Inside, the atmosphere was sterile, smelling faintly of floor wax and old paper. Lydia stood alone at the defendant's table. She wore a navy blue blazer she had bought at a consignment shop 3 days prior, hoping it made her look competent, stable, like someone who deserved to keep her children. But she could feel the fraying thread on the inside of the left cuff, a secret reminder that she was coming apart at the seams. To her right, sitting at the plaintiff's table, was Preston. Preston Hart, CEO of Hart and Galloway Logistics. He looked immaculate. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that Lydia knew cost more than her parents' car. His posture was relaxed, leaning back in the leather chair, with the casual confidence of a man who had already read the script and knew he won in the end. He didn't look at Lydia. He hadn't looked at her directly in 6 months, not since the night the private investigators served her the papers. Next to Preston sat Garrison Ford. If Preston was the confident General, Ford was the executioner. Garrison Ford was a man whose reputation in divorce law was whispered about in country clubs with a mixture of fear and reverence. He was known as the silencer. He didn't just win cases, he obliterated the opposition so thoroughly that they were afraid to appeal. He had silver hair, slicked back with severe precision, and a pen that he clicked rhythmically. A ticking clock counting down the seconds of Lydia's life as she knew it. "Mrs. Hart," Judge Anthony Brannigan's voice boomed from the bench. Lydia flinched. Judge Brannigan was a man of strict schedules and zero tolerance for emotional outbursts. He looked over his spectacles at her, his face unreadable. "I asked if you have managed to retain new counsel," the judge said, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. Lydia swallowed hard. Her throat felt like it was filled with sand. "No, Your Honor. I couldn't afford the retainer for Mr. Henderson. I will be representing myself today." A stifled snicker came from the plaintiff's table. It wasn't Preston. He was too smart to make a sound. It was his junior associate, a young woman in a sharp grey suit who quickly covered her mouth. Garrison Ford stood up, buttoning his jacket with a slow, deliberate movement. "Your Honor, with all due respect to Mrs. Hart, we have postponed these proceedings 3 times. My client has been incredibly patient while his ex-wife, soon has shuffled through 4 different attorneys. We are here to settle custody and the division of assets. Further delays are prejudicial to my client, and more importantly, damaging to the children, Sophie and Lucas." Hearing their names made Lydia's chest tighten. Sophie was 7. Lucas was 4. They were currently with a court-appointed nanny because Ford had successfully argued that Lydia's current living situation, a one-bedroom apartment in Renton, was transient and unstable. "I am ready to proceed, Your Honor," Lydia said, her voice shaking slightly before she steadied it. "I don't need a delay." "Very well." Judge Brannigan nodded, opening the thick file in front of him. "Mr. Ford, you have the floor. Let's make this quick." Lydia looked at the empty chair beside her. In a fair fight, she would have a lawyer. In a fair fight, 50% of the assets Preston had built during their 10-year marriage would be hers. But Preston had hidden everything. The forensic accountant Lydia had hired months ago had quit suddenly refunding her money without explanation. Every lawyer she approached eventually received a phone call or a conflict of interest notice, or simply told her the case was too complex. She was fighting a ghost. Preston had moved money into offshore shell companies, tied assets up in trusts named after his mother, and claimed the business was nearing bankruptcy, despite the new Porsche he had driven to court. Lydia looked at Preston's profile. He was writing something on a legal pad. He looked bored. "Just you wait," she thought, though the thought lacked conviction. Just you wait. But as the clock on the wall ticked forward, Lydia realized with a sinking dread that there was nothing to wait for. No cavalry was coming. It was just her, a woman who had sacrificed her career to raise his children, standing against a man who had monetized every second of their existence. "Let us discuss the incident of October 14, 2023. Garrison Ford began pacing slowly in front of the judge's bench. He didn't look at Lydia. He treated her like a piece of furniture that was about to be removed. Lydia closed her eyes. She knew this was coming. "On the date in question," Ford continued, his voice smooth and baritone, "Mrs. Hart was observed at the Westlake Shopping Center. She was with the children. According to 3 independent witnesses and security footage, Mrs. Hart engaged in a verbal altercation with a stranger in the parking lot. She was seen screaming, waving her arms, and most disturbingly leaving the children unattended in the vehicle for approximately 6 minutes while she pursued this stranger." "That's not what happened," Lydia blurted out, standing up. "He hit my car. He threatened me." "Mrs. Hart, sit down," Judge Brannigan snapped. Ford smiled. It was a cold, reptilian expression. "Instability, Your Honor. That is the pattern we see here. We have submitted the police report from that afternoon. No charges were filed against the other driver. But Mrs. Hart was noted to be hysterical by the responding officer." He picked up a document. "And then we have the financial mismanagement. In the last year of the marriage, Mrs. Hart withdrew over $40,000 from the joint savings account. Cash withdrawals, untraceable. My client, Mr. Hart, fears that she is gambling or perhaps involved in substance abuse. We have no receipts, no paper trail, just missing money that was intended for the children's education." Lydia's hands shook. That money hadn't been for gambling. It was for the house. The leaks in the roof of the marital home, the therapy sessions for Lucas's speech delay that Preston refused to pay for because he claimed Lucas would grow out of it. She had paid cash to contractors because Preston scrutinized every credit card charge, interrogating her over a $10 Starbucks purchase while he dropped $5,000 on a dinner with clients. "I used that money for the family," Lydia said, her voice trembling. "Preston cut off my access to the credit cards. I had to stash cash just to buy groceries." "Objection," Ford said lazily. "Hearsay, and frankly delusional. Mr. Hart is a generous provider. The records show he deposited $5,000 monthly into the household account, which barely covered the mortgage and utilities," Lydia cried. "Your Honor." Ford turned his back on her, facing the judge. "This is exactly why we are requesting full legal and physical custody. Mrs. Hart is unwell. She is paranoid. She claims my client is hiding millions, yet she cannot produce a shred of evidence. She claims she is destitute, yet she withdraws thousands in cash. She claims to be a good mother, yet she screams at strangers in parking lots while her children cry in a locked car." Ford paused for effect, letting the silence hang in the room. "Mr. Hart is prepared to offer her a settlement," Ford said, sounding like he was offering charity to a beggar. "He will pay for a one-bedroom apartment for 6 months. He will provide a stipend of $2,000 a month for 1 year. In exchange, he retains the marital home, the business assets, and full custody of Sophie and Lucas. Mrs. Hart will be granted supervised visitation on alternating weekends." The words hit Lydia like physical blows. Supervised visitation. As if she were a criminal. As if she were a danger to the babies she had nursed, rocked, and raised, while Preston was away on business in Tokyo or London or New York. "I won't sign that," Lydia whispered. "Then you leave us no choice," Ford said, finally turning to look at her. His eyes were dead. "We will petition the court for a psychological evaluation and request 0 visitation until you are deemed fit by a state-appointed doctor. And we both know how long that takes, Lydia. Years." Preston finally looked up. He caught Lydia's eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It was a message. "Take the deal, or I will destroy you completely." Lydia looked at the judge. "Your Honor, please. He has accounts in the Caymans. He has a holding company in Delaware called Silverstone LLC that he didn't declare. I know it exists." "Do you have proof, Mrs. Hart?" Judge Brannigan asked wearily. "Bank statements, incorporation papers, a tax ID number. I saw the letters once in his briefcase before he changed the locks on his office." "So you have nothing?" The judge sighed, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Mrs. Hart alleging fraud without evidence is a serious matter. I am inclined to grant Mr. Ford's motion for the summary judgment. You are out of money, out of lawyers, and frankly, out of credibility." The walls of the courtroom felt like they were closing in. The air was too thin. Lydia looked at the water pitcher on her table, watching the condensation slide down the glass. This was it. This was the end. She was going to lose Sophie and Lucas to a man who only wanted them to maintain his image of the perfect family man. She gripped the table. "Please," she whispered, "just listen to me." "I have listened," the judge said, picking up his gavel. "I am ready to rule." The judge cleared his throat. The sound echoed in the silent room. "In the matter of Hart versus Hart," Judge Brannigan began, his voice monotonous, "the court finds that the plaintiff, Preston Hart, has demonstrated financial stability and a consistent home environment. The defendant, Lydia Hart, has failed to provide evidence of her claims regarding hidden assets and has demonstrated a concerning pattern of erratic behavior." Preston straightened his tie. He was already mentally at the celebratory lunch he had booked at Canlis. He would order the Wagyu. "Therefore," the judge continued, "it is the ruling of this court that sole legal and physical custody be awarded to The sound was loud and jarring. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom, which were supposed to be locked during ruling, swung open. Every head in the room turned. Standing in the doorway was a man. He didn't look like a lawyer. He was wearing a rumpled brown trench coat that was wet with rain. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with wild, thinning grey hair and thick-rimmed glasses that were fogged up. He carried a battered leather satchel that looked like it had survived a war zone. He looked out of breath, his chest heaving as he dripped water onto the pristine courtroom floor. "Order!" Judge Brannigan barked, slamming his gavel. "Who is this?" "This is a closed session." The man didn't flinch. He walked down the center aisle, his wet shoes squeaking against the linoleum. He didn't look at Lydia. He didn't look at the judge. He looked straight at Preston Hart. Preston's face, which had been a mask of triumphant boredom seconds ago, suddenly went slack. The color drained from his cheeks so fast it looked like a magic trick. He gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning ivory. "Security!" Garrison Ford shouted, standing up. "Remove this man immediately." The man stopped 10 feet from the plaintiff's table. He reached into his wet trench coat. The bailiff's hand went to his holster. "Hands where I can see them. Now." The man slowly pulled his hand out. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a single small USB drive. It was bright red. He held it up, the plastic gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Your Honor," the man said. His voice was raspy, like he hadn't spoken in days. "My name is Elias Blackwood. I was the chief financial officer for Hart and Galloway, logistics for 12 years, until 6 months ago when Mr. Hart fired me and threatened to kill my dog if I didn't leave the state." A gasp rippled through the small courtroom. The court reporter stopped typing for a split second before frantically catching up. "Objection!" Ford roared, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "This is preposterous. This man is a disgruntled former employee with a history of alcoholism. I demand he be removed." "I am not drunk, Mr. Ford," Elias said calmly. He turned to the judge. "And I am not here to testify as a witness. I am here to submit evidence into the public record regarding the active RICO investigation against Preston Hart." The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the lights. RICO, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It was the nuclear bomb of legal terms. It meant organized crime. It meant money laundering. It meant federal prison. Lydia stared at the man. She recognized him now. She had seen him at the company Christmas parties years ago. He had been the quiet man in the corner, the one Preston always made fun of for driving a 1998 Honda Civic. Judge Brannigan stared at Elias over his spectacles. "Mr. Blackwood, you cannot just barge into a family court hearing and allege federal crimes. This is highly irregular." "I understand, Your Honor," Elias said. He took a step forward and placed the red USB drive gently on the court clerk's desk. "But this drive contains the ledger. The real ledger." He turned to look at Preston. Preston was no longer leaning back. He was hunched forward, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. His eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit. "It shows the accounts in the Cayman Islands," Elias said, his voice gaining strength. "It shows the transfers to Silverstone LLC. It shows the $3 million withdrawn from the Employee Pension Fund to purchase the Kensington estate in meaningless trusts." Elias paused. He looked at Lydia. For the first time, his expression softened. "And it shows the payment of $50,000 made on October the 13th to a man named Marcus Vane, a paid actor. The man who attacked your car in the parking lot, Mrs. Hart." Lydia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The parking lot incident. The man screaming at her. It had been staged. It had been a setup to make her look crazy in public. "Lies!" Preston shouted, jumping to his feet. "He's lying! He's crazy!" "Sit down, Mr. Hart." The judge banged the gavel so hard the wood handle cracked. Elias Blackwood didn't blink. He looked at Preston and asked the question that froze the room. "If I'm lying, Preston, then why did your personal assistant just transfer the last of the operational funds to a bank in Belize 4 minutes ago, using the authorization code only you possess?" Preston froze. He looked at his watch. He looked at his phone, which was sitting on the table. The screen lit up with a notification. Transfer complete. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a trap snapping shut. Judge Brannigan looked at the phone. He looked at Preston. Then he looked at the bailiff. "Bailiff," the judge said, his voice dangerously low. "Lock the doors. Nobody leaves this room." Locking the doors of a courtroom changes the atmosphere instantly. It shifts from a place of dry legal bureaucracy to a cage. The heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding home echoed like a gunshot. And for the first time in 10 years, Lydia Hart saw genuine fear in her husband's eyes. Preston Hart remained frozen, his hand hovering over his smartphone. The screen was still glowing, a beacon of his guilt in the dim fluorescent lighting. "Bailiff," Judge Brannigan commanded, his voice devoid of the earlier exhaustion. He was wide awake now. "Seize the defendant's phone. Immediately." "You can't do that," Garrison Ford shouted, abandoning his cool, collected demeanor. He stepped in front of Preston, blocking the bailiff's path. "This is a violation of my client's Fourth Amendment rights." That device contains privileged attorney-client communications. If you touch that phone, I will have this entire court sanctioned before lunch. "And if you don't step aside, Mr. Ford," the judge replied, his eyes narrowing dangerous slits, "I will have you held in contempt and placed in a holding cell alongside the petty thieves. This witness has just alleged an active federal crime and provided immediate corroboration. Step aside." Ford hesitated. He looked at Preston. Then, with a sneer of self-preservation, he stepped back. He was a shark, but he wasn't going to sink with the ship. The bailiff, a burly man named Officer Miller, who had spent 20 years watching divorces turn ugly, snatched the phone from the table. Preston flinched, as if he'd been slapped. "It's password protected." Preston spat, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and panic. "You'll never get in." Elias Blackwood. The man in the wet trench coat cleared his throat. He was still standing in the center aisle, looking like a drowned rat, but he held himself with the dignity of a biblical prophet. "The passcode is 0418, Elias said softly. Preston's head snapped toward him. Lydia felt a chill run down her spine. "April 18th, she whispered. "That's not a birthday." "No," Elias said, looking sadly at Lydia. "It's the day he opened his first offshore account. April 18th, 7 years ago. The same day, you were in the hospital giving birth to Sophie. While you were in labor for 20 hours, Mrs. Hart Preston wasn't in the cafeteria getting coffee like he told you. He was on a satellite call with a banker in Zurich, hiding the first million." A collective gasp went through the gallery. Lydia felt the air leave her lungs. She remembered that day vividly. Preston had come back to the delivery room, smelling of mints and sweat, claiming he had been pacing the halls out of worry. He had been securing his exit strategy before their daughter had even taken her first breath. Officer Miller typed in the code. The phone unlocked. "It's open, Your Honor," the bailiff confirmed. "Bring it here," the judge ordered. He then pointed to the red USB drive sitting on the clerk's desk. "And load that drive. I want to see everything on the monitors. Now. This is a travesty, Ford yelled, slamming his expensive briefcase onto the table. I move for an immediate mistrial. My client is being ambushed. Denied, Brannigan said, not even looking up as he accepted the phone. He scrolled for a moment, his eyebrows raising higher with every swipe. He didn't speak for a long minute. The silence stretched tight and suffocating. Finally, the judge looked up. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked at Lydia. Mrs. Hart, the judge said, his voice unusually gentle. Did you know your husband owns a controlling interest in a shell company called Blue Jay Aviation? Lydia shook her head, tears pricking her eyes. No, Your Honor. I drive a 6-year-old minivan. I don't know anything about aviation. Well, the judge turned the phone screen toward the courtroom, though it was too far for them to see clearly. According to this banking app, Blue Jay Aviation just purchased a one-way fuel credit for a flight departing from King County International Airport at 11 a.m. today. That is in 45 minutes. The judge turned his gaze to Preston. You weren't just moving money, Mr. Hart. You were planning to leave the country during a custody hearing. Preston stood up, knocking his chair over. The veneer of the sophisticated billionaire was gone. His face was twisted into a snarl. It's my money. I earned it. I built that company from nothing while she sat at home and played house. She deserves nothing. She's a leech. Sit down, Officer Miller barked, stepping closer, his hand resting on his taser. I won't sit down, Preston screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Lydia. You think you've won? You think this pathetic accountant can stop me? You have no idea who you're dealing with, Lydia. You're weak. You've always been weak. Lydia looked at him. Really looked at him. For years she had believed him. She had believed she was useless, that she was lucky he stayed with her, that she was bad with money and too emotional. But seeing him now sweating, screaming, terrified of an old man in a wet coat, she realized the truth. She stood up. She didn't shake this time. I'm not weak, Preston, she said, her voice cutting through his shouting. I raised your children alone while you were building your empire of lies. I stretched pennies while you hoarded millions, and I am still standing here. You're the one who is running. Preston lunged. It happened in a blur. He scrambled over the table, hands reaching for Lydia's throat. Garrison Ford shouted. The stenographer screamed, but Officer Miller was faster. There was a crackle of electricity, the pop of a taser deployment, and Preston Hart, the titan of logistics, crumpled to the floor, convulsing in a heap of expensive Italian wool. Medical! The judge shouted. Get medical in here and get cuffs on him. Lydia didn't flinch. She stood over him, watching the man who had terrorized her for a decade writhe on the dirty linoleum. She didn't feel fear anymore. She felt a cold, hard resolve. The war wasn't over, but the first battle had just turned into a massacre. 30 minutes later, the chaos had settled into a tense, controlled burn. Preston had been examined by paramedics, handcuffed and shoved back into his chair, surrounded by 3 deputies. He was no longer shouting. He was staring at the table, his jaw clenched so hard a vein throbbed in his temple. The courtroom monitors flickered to life. The clerk had accessed the red USB drive. Spreadsheets filled the screens. Thousands of rows of data. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Brannigan said, gesturing to the screen. Walk us through this. Briefly. I want to know exactly what I am looking at before I refer this to the district attorney. Elias Blackwood stepped up to the witness stand. He looked tired, the adrenaline fading, leaving him looking frail. He took a sip of water and adjusted his glasses. "What you are seeing," Elias began, pointing to the column on the left, "is a system Mr. Hart called the Siphon. It was designed to look like losses, shipping delays, damaged cargo fuel surcharges, standard logistics problems. But they weren't real." He pointed to a specific entry dated 2 years prior. "Here, November 12th, a shipment of electronics listed as lost at sea near Singapore. Insurance paid out $4 million. The cargo wasn't lost. It was sold on the black market in Jakarta. The insurance money went into the company account, was cleaned through a consulting fee to Silverstone LLC, and then deposited into Mr. Hart's private trust." "And the shareholders?" the judge asked. "They took the loss," Elias said. "Stock prices dipped, Masuk. Mr. Hart bought back shares at a discount and then found new efficiencies to boost the stock back up. He was shorting his own company, Your Honor, betting against his own employees." Lydia listened horrified. November the 12th. She remembered that date. It was their anniversary. Preston had called her sounding devastated, saying the business was in trouble, that they had to cancel their trip to Napa because he couldn't justify the expense when the company was bleeding. She had cooked him a pot roast and rubbed his shoulders while he pretended to cry about the lost cargo. But the most relevant part for this court, Elias continued, scrolling down the document with a wireless mouse the clerk had handed him, is the Family Expenses tab. The screen changed. A new spreadsheet appeared. This one didn't have shipping codes. It had dates and notes. John, for $12,000. Private investigator, Tail Lydia. Feb 10. $5,000. Dr. Aris retainer for falsified psych eval. March 22nd. $25,000. Purchase of prepaid phones for harassment campaign. The courtroom murmured. This wasn't just financial fraud. It was a calculated campaign of psychological warfare. "He hired people to call me?" Lydia asked, her voice trembling. "The hang-up calls the breathing on the other end of the line at 3 a.m. "Yes," Elias said softly. "He wanted you sleep-deprived. He wanted you anxious. He wanted you to look unstable in front of the kids and the neighbors. It was a line item in his budget, Mrs. Hart." "Destabilization." Garrison Ford stood up slowly. He looked pale. He realized he had been part of a conspiracy that went far beyond a standard divorce. "Your Honor, I had no knowledge of these activities. I was retained solely for the dissolution of marriage." "Sit down, Mr. Ford," the judge said dismissively. "We will discuss your bar license later." Elias clicked on one final folder. It was labeled Endgame. "This," Elias said, "is why I came today. I couldn't watch him do this last part." The screen displayed a wire transfer confirmation pending authorization. The amount was staggering $12.5 million. The destination was a bank in the Cook Islands, a jurisdiction with no extradition treaty for these types of crimes. "He liquidated the children's trust funds yesterday," Elias said. "Sophie and Lucas's college money. The emergency medical funds, all of it. He pooled it with the company reserves." Lydia felt like she might vomit. "He stole from the kids. He wasn't planning on taking them, Mrs. Hart," Elias revealed, dropping the final bombshell. "The custody battle. It was a distraction. He fought for the kids, so you would be too busy defending yourself to look at the money. He never intended to take Sophie and Lucas. He was going to leave them behind. He was going to leave the country today, alone with all the money, and leave you with the debt, the bankrupt company, and the ruin." Preston looked up, a twisted smile forming on his lips. "They drag me down," he muttered loud enough for the microphone to catch. kids are anchors. I needed to fly." The cruelty of it was so absolute, so pure in its selfishness, that the room fell silent again. He hadn't fought for his children because he loved them. He fought for them to use them as pawns, intending to discard them the moment his flight took off. Judge Brannigan's face turned a shade of purple. Lydia hadn't thought possible. He slammed his hand on the bench, not needing the gavel. "I have heard enough," Brannigan growled. "Mr. Hart, you are a monster. But unluckily for you, you are a monster within my jurisdiction. The court issues an immediate bench warrant for the arrest of Preston Hart on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." Judge Brannigan announced, his voice booming. "Furthermore, I am stripping you of all parental rights, effective immediately pending a criminal trial. Sole legal and physical custody is awarded to Lydia Hart." Preston laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "You can't hold me here. My lawyers in New York are already filing an appeal. And you," he sneered at Elias, "you're dead. You signed your death warrant walking in here." "Actually," Elias said, looking at his watch, "I think the only thing dead is your engine." "What are you talking about?" Preston snapped. "The flight," Elias said. "Blue Jay Aviation, tail number N4558. It was scheduled to depart at 11 a.m. But you see, I made a call before I came into this room. I called the FAA. I reported a potential bomb threat on a private aircraft at King County International." Preston's eyes widened. "They grounded the plane, Preston," Elias said with a grim satisfaction. "And when the police searched it, they didn't find a bomb. But they did find 6 large suitcases filled with gold bars and bearer bonds. The pilot is already in custody. He's talking. He says you told him to file a flight plan for Mexico, but to actually head for the Cook Islands." Preston slumped in his chair. The escape hatch was welded shut. The money was seized. The game was over. "Officer Miller," the judge said. "Get him out of my sight. No bail. Remand him to the county jail until the feds arrive." The deputies hauled Preston up. He didn't fight this time. He looked deflated, a man whose soul had been replaced by a calculator that had finally run out of batteries. As they dragged him past Lydia, he stopped. He looked at her, his eyes searching for some trace of the submissive wife he had controlled for a decade. "Lydia," he rasped, "you can't do this. Who's going to pay for the house? Who's going to take care of you? You're nothing without me." Lydia looked him in the eye. She saw the wrinkles of fear around his mouth. She saw the pathetic desperation. "I don't need you to take care of me," Lydia said, her voice steady and loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I never did. I survived you, Preston, and now I'm going to live." She turned her back on him. "Get him out of here." The doors were unlocked. The deputies marched Preston out into the hallway, where a swarm of press tipped off by Elias was already waiting. The flashes of cameras exploded like lightning, capturing the downfall of the billionaire logistics mogul. Lydia stood alone at the defendant's table, but she wasn't the trembling woman who had walked in that morning. She took a deep breath. The air didn't smell like floor wax anymore. It smelled like rain and ozone. It smelled like freedom. Garrison Ford was furiously packing his bag, trying to sneak out a side door. "Mr. Ford," the judge called out. Ford froze. "Don't leave town," Brannigan said ominously. "The Bar Association will be in touch by end of business today." Ford scurried out like a cockroach exposed to light. The courtroom began to empty. The clerk was crying softly. The bailiff gave Lydia a respectful nod. Lydia turned to Elias Blackwood. He was sitting on the bench in the gallery, his head in his hands. He looked exhausted. She walked over to him and sat down. She didn't know what to say. Thank you seemed too small. You saved my life. Seemed too dramatic, even if it was true. Why? She asked simply. Why now? You could have gone to the police months ago. Why wait until the hearing? Elias looked up. His eyes were watery behind the thick lenses. Because of the dog, he said. The dog. He threatened my dog. Elias said, a sad smile touching his lips. But my dog died last week. Old age. And once Buster was gone, I realized I had nothing left to lose. And I realized I couldn't let him do to those kids what he did to his employees. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. Also, there's something else. The money he stole, the government will seize most of it. It will take years to litigate. Lydia nodded. I know. I don't care about the millions. I just have my kids back. You might have a bit more than that, Elias said. He handed her the paper. Before he fired me, I managed to do one thing. One small transaction he didn't notice because he was too busy looking at the big accounts. Lydia unfolded the paper. It was a deed. What is this? It's a cabin, Elias said, up in the Cascades, and a small annuity. I moved it into a trust in your maiden name 3 years ago when I first saw the bruises on your arm. I knew you'd need an escape hatch one day. It's not millions, Lydia, but it's paid for. It's yours. Lydia stared at the deed. Lydia Miller, her maiden name. A name she hadn't used in 10 years. She threw her arms around the wet, rumpled old man and hugged him. He stiffened for a moment, then awkwardly patted her back. Go get your kids, Mrs. Hart, Elias whispered. Or, Miss Miller. Miss Miller, she corrected, wiping a tear from her cheek. Definitely, Miss Miller. Lydia walked out of the courtroom. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing a sliver of pale blue sky. She walked past the cameras, past the shouting reporters, asking for a comment on her husband's arrest. She got into her beat-up minivan, the one Preston had mocked. She turned the key. It started on the first try. She had to pick up Sophie and Lucas. But as she pulled out of the parking lot, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Be careful. He didn't work alone. The pilot talked, but he mentioned a partner. Someone named the architect. Watch your back. Lydia stared at the screen. The joy of victory curdled slightly in her stomach. Preston was in jail. Elias had exposed the books. But the architect. She gripped the steering wheel. She wasn't done yet. She had cut the head off the snake, but the body was still thrashing. The rain had stopped, but the sky over Seattle remained a bruised purple heavy with the threat of a returning storm. Lydia Hart drove her battered minivan toward the one place she had sworn never to return to the sprawling estate on Mercer Island, the marital home. The text message burned in her mind. The architect. She had picked up Sophie and Lucas from the court-appointed nanny's apartment in Queen Anne only 20 minutes ago. The reunion had been a blur of tears and desperate hugs. Sophie had clung to Lydia's leg, sobbing that she wanted to go home, and Lucas, confused and quiet, had simply buried his face in her neck, smelling of baby shampoo and fear. Lydia had buckled them into their car seats, whispered promises she hoped she could keep, and driven them to a public library parking lot. Stay here, she had told the nanny. A kind but bewildered woman named Mrs. Higgins, handing her $200 in cash, the last of her savings. I have to get their things. Their real things. The teddy bears. The blankets. I won't let them sleep in a strange cabin without their comfort objects. Watch them, please. If I'm not back in an hour, call this number." She had written down Elias Blackwood's number. Now Lydia pulled up to the iron gates of the Hart estate. They were open. That was the first warning. Preston never left the gates open. She turned off the headlights and let the minivan coast up the long, winding driveway. The house loomed ahead, a modern monstrosity of glass and steel that had always felt more like a museum than a home. It was dark except for a single light flickering in the study. Preston's study. Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. Preston was in a holding cell. The police had swept the plane. Who was in the house? She grabbed the tire iron from under the driver's seat. It was heavy cold and rusted, a stark contrast to the polished elegance of the world she was stepping back into. She crept to the front door. It was unlocked. She pushed it open. The house smelled of expensive leather and something else, something acrid. Smoke. She moved silently across the marble foyer, her sneakers squeaking faintly. She could hear the sound of shredding, the mechanical whir, crunch, whir of a high-capacity paper shredder running non-stop. Lydia approached the study door, which was slightly ajar. She peered inside. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a hitman. It was Garrison Ford. The lawyer had shed his jacket. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing expensive cufflinks that caught the light of the fireplace. He was feeding stacks of documents into a shredder by the desk, while simultaneously tossing leather-bound binders into the roaring fireplace. "You're going to trip the smoke alarm, Garrison," Lydia said, her voice steady, despite the fear clutching her throat. Ford spun around, dropping a file. His eyes were mute-manic. He looked like a cornered animal. "Lydia." He breathed a nervous smile, twitching at the corner of his mouth. "I was just securing the client's property. Standard procedure." "Standard procedure is to burn evidence." Lydia stepped into the room, raising the tire iron slightly. "The text message warned me about the architect. That's you, isn't it?" Preston was the face, the loud mouth, the ego. "But you structured it. You set up the shell companies. You built the maze." Ford laughed, a harsh barking sound. He kicked the shredder, silencing it. Preston is an idiot. He couldn't launder a $20 bill without asking for permission. Of course I built it. I built all of it. The trusts, the offshore accounts, the fake insurance claims. And I took my 30% off the top. He took a step toward her. "And you, my dear, are interrupting a very expensive cleanup operation. The feds are coming, yes, but they won't look here, not immediately. They're focused on the plane. By the time they get a warrant for the house, these files will be ash." "Why did you do it?" Lydia asked, gripping the iron tighter. "You have money. You have a reputation. Why help him destroy his own family?" "Because power is addictive, Lydia," Ford sneered. "And because it was easy. You were the perfect victim. Quiet, submissive. Or so we thought. We underestimated the accountant. And we certainly underestimated you." He glanced at the heavy brass poker next to the fireplace. His hand twitched toward it. "Don't," Lydia warned. "I'm not the same woman you bullied in court this morning. That woman is gone." "You have no proof," Ford said, inching closer to the fire. "Preston is going down. I'll cut a deal. I'll say I was misled by a sociopathic client. I'll keep my license. I'll keep my freedom. And you'll fade away into poverty with your bratty children." "I don't need proof," Lydia said calmly. Ford frowned. "What? I said. I don't need proof. Lydia used her free hand to pull her phone from her pocket. The screen was glowing. Because Elias Blackwood isn't just an accountant. He's thorough. What does that mean? It means, Lydia said, that when Elias hacked Preston's phone in court, he didn't just mirror the screen to the judge. He opened a remote line. A microphone. She tapped the screen. Hello, Detective Kovacs. Did you get all of that? A gruff voice echoed from the speakerphone loud and clear in the silent study. We got it, Mrs. Hart. We're at the gate. Do not engage. We are breaching the front door now. The color drained from Ford's face. He looked at the window. Blue and red lights were already flashing against the glass, painting the room in a chaotic disco of police colors. You bitched, Ford hissed, grabbing the poker. He lunged. Lydia didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She stepped to the side, a move she had learned from dodging Preston's drunken stumbling for years, and swung the tire iron. It connected with Ford's forearm. He screamed, dropping the poker, and fell to his knees, clutching his arm. That, Lydia said, standing over him breathless and shaking, but triumphant, was for the parking lot. The front doors burst open. Police, show me your hands. A team of officers, led by a tall man in a windbreaker, marked FBI, swarmed the room. They hauled a sobbing Garrison Ford to his feet. He was read his rights while staring at Lydia with a mixture of hatred and awe. As they dragged him out, the FBI agent, Agent Kovacs, stopped in front of Lydia. He looked at the tire iron in her hand, then up at her face. You okay, ma'am? Lydia looked at the burning files in the fireplace. She looked at the shredded paper on the floor, the remnants of the lies that had controlled her life. I am now, she said. She dropped the tire iron. It clattered loudly on the hardwood floor. I'm going to get my kids. 6 months later. The snow fell softly on the Cascades, blanketing the towering pines in white. It was quiet here, the kind of silence that wasn't heavy or threatening, but peaceful. Smoke curled from the stone chimney of a small A-frame cabin tucked away near Leavenworth. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, a warm, welcoming fire, not one meant for destroying evidence. Lydia sat in a plush armchair, a mug of hot cocoa in her hands. She watched Sophie and Lucas playing on the rug. They were building a fortress out of pillows. Sophie was laughing, a real belly-shaking laugh that Lydia hadn't heard in years. Lucas was directing her, his speech delay almost gone after months of proper therapy and a stress-free home. The legal battle had been swift and brutal. With Garrison Ford's testimony traded for a reduced sentence of 15 years, Preston Hart's empire had collapsed completely. The RICO charges stuck. Preston was currently serving the first year of a 25-year sentence in a federal penitentiary in Colorado. He would be an old man when he saw the sky as a free person again. Lydia didn't get the millions. The government seized the assets, the mansion, the cars, and the offshore accounts to pay back the shareholders and the fines. But she didn't leave empty-handed. Elias Blackwood had been right. The trust fund for the cabin was ironclad. It was hers. And thanks to a restitution clause that Elias had secretly triggered in the company bylaws years ago, Lydia received a monthly stipend, enough to live simply enough to feed the kids enough to breathe. There was a knock at the sturdy oak door. Lydia stood up and opened it. Elias Blackwood stood there, brushing snow off his coat. He looked healthier now. He had gained a little weight, and the haunted look was gone from his eyes. He held a small box. I didn't think you'd make it up the mountain in this weather. Lydia smiled, ushering him in. The Honda is tougher than it looks. Elias chuckled. He walked in and was immediately tackled by Sophie and Lucas. Uncle Elias, Uncle Elias. He laughed, handing them peppermint sticks from his pocket. Then he turned to Lydia and handed her the box. What is this? She asked. I found it, Elias said. In the archives. It didn't belong to the company. It belonged to you. Lydia opened the box. Inside was a small silver locket. It was cheap tarnished and old. It was the locket her grandmother had given her when she was a teenager, the one Preston had made her put away, because he said it looked trashy compared to the diamonds he wanted her to wear. She opened it. The tiny faded photo of her parents was still inside. Tears pricked her eyes. You saved this. I thought you might want to remember who you were, Elias said gently. Before all of this, Lydia clasped the locket around her neck. It felt cool against her skin. It felt like home. She looked out the window at the falling snow. She was Lydia Miller again. She was a mother. She was a survivor. She had stood alone in a courtroom filled with wolves, and she had walked out the only one left standing. I don't need to remember who I was, Lydia said, turning back to the fire, her hand resting on her daughter's head. I like who I am now. The wind howled outside, but inside the fire burned bright, and for the first time in a decade, Lydia Hart wasn't afraid of the cold. And that is the story of Lydia Hart, a woman who was pushed to the edge, stripped of her voice, and buried under a mountain of lies only to dig her way out with nothing but the truth. It's a reminder that no matter how powerful the enemy or how hopeless the situation seems, the truth has a way of breaking the strongest chains. We often think we are weak because we are silent, but Lydia proved that silence is sometimes just the calm before the storm. I hope this story inspired you to stand your ground in your own battles. If Lydia's journey from the courtroom to the cabin touched your heart, please destroy that. Like button, just like Lydia destroyed Preston's empire. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.